What is up, guys? It is your boy NCSO7 here, and it has been almost, okay, not really almost, but close to a week since Doki Doki Literature Club Plus is finally released. And of course, people have been playing it, maybe, and I've already done my playthrough on it, which, shameless promotion, you can go check that out. But today, we're here to finally review Doki Doki Literature Club Plus. And whether or not this is really what we should have waited for 4 years. Okay, the short answer is no, we shouldn't have, but let's go through the categories. Now, this game will be different than, well, I will be reviewing it in a different way. While I will use the categories I would use in the other reviews, I'm going to pay much more attention to the new stuff, since this is basically just an updated version of the original game, but with $15 slapped onto it. So, let's go through it. Starting off with the presentation. Now, the presentation for this game, I mean, it's called Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, so it's basically just an updated version of the original game with some extra content. Honestly, there really isn't much to say about the presentation. It's pretty much just an updated version of the game, but what I can say a bunch about is the visuals for the game. Now, for the most part, this game is basically the exact same as the original game. It uses the same sprites, same expressions. Heck, it doesn't even have any new sprites or expressions or anything for the characters, which is kind of boring. I don't know. While they do make new backgrounds, they don't honestly use them that much. Outside, only time is the side stories, but we'll get to the side stories later. But the fact that there's no new expressions for any of the Dokis or any real differences at all just feels kind of meh to me. Now, one thing that is amazing are the brand new CG artwork. This is probably the most beautiful stuff I've seen before, especially Sayori hugging Yuri and Natsuki together on the stairwell. It is so damn beautiful. It's probably my favorite part of the whole game. It's just the new CGs. They're so beautiful. They just look so good. So honestly, presentation-wise, it isn't really that bad, but it does at least enhance it enough to be somewhat better. Even though I could nitpick a bit and say that they could have changed some of the menu aesthetics and made it a little bit more pleasing, I'm not gonna harp on that for too much. Now moving on to the story, which is probably the most important part of this, because this is a visual novel. The most important thing is the story. So how's the story? Well, there's two parts to the story. First one being DDLC. And this is kind of where I'm going to take a bit of a detour and kind of go into this game in a little bit more detail and kind of talk about the specific sections. Starting off with the original DDLC. Now, the original DDLC isn't really changed that much from the original game's counterpart. It's basically the exact same thing, the exact same story. The only real issue is that since this game's been out for so long, it's even easier to go into this game spoiled. Which I'd say is one of the biggest issues with DDLC, is the fact that it's really hard to get that completely blind playthrough. You could have waited all this time to play the game, but you probably already know what happens at the end of Act 1 and all this other garbage. And no, I won't spoil anything for you guys, so if you don't want to be spoiled, you're safe. But still, I feel like they could have done at least a little bit more, but I don't know. It's not a very big issue, but what I do have a bit of an issue with is the fact that the original DDLC is basically the exact same thing. You know, for the fact that this is called DDLC Plus, I would have expected them to enhance it in some sort of way, but not really. They don't really enhance it at all. They have like a couple new jump scares in Act 2, but that's it, and there's really not much to write home about. And remember how in the original DDLC, once you got to Act 3, you would actually have to go onto your computer, into your computer's file folders, to delete Monica's character file, and it would actually have an impact on the game? Well, you can't do this time around. See, this time around, instead of actually going to the computer, because keep in mind this is also released on consoles, it said when you leave DDLC, you actually leave to a desktop, and this gives you a menu option for the files, so you can delete them there. It makes sense for console versions, yeah, but the PC version, you kind of expect to do it the same way you could before, right? No. at least when I looked, I couldn't change the character files, and it seems to literally be baked right into the game. This doesn't seem like a very big issue, but it's an issue for me because this kind of proves to me that this game really isn't as authentic as I would wish it to be. Because the original DDLC felt a lot more personal, because not only was it much more shocking that time around because no one knew about it prior to that, but also because of the fact that it was actually changing stuff on your very computer. This time around, it doesn't do that, so it removes a lot of that fear factor because all this stuff is just the game. There's nothing actually going on your computer at all, which is kind of sad. But honestly, there's really not much to say about the original DDLC. It's there, it's completely whatever. But what is interesting is the side stories. 6 side stories have been added, both containing 2 parts to them. This is basically the selling point in the game to describe how some of the character interrelationships with one another, which is honestly on paper sounds really good, because honestly, thinking back to the original DDLC, the only thing that I think it really could have used was some more explanation for how certain characters interacted with each other. But now we finally have the side stories. So, how are the side stories? Not that great. Okay. Underwhelming is a good way to put it. The problem with the side stories, in my opinion, is that they're so predictable and so drawn out. In fact, I could say that about this game entirely. This game drags out a lot of things, and I think the side stories are the biggest example of that. For like the Monica and Sayori one, it's about how Monica doesn't know whether or not she can trust Sayori, but it's just dragged out and just made way more deep than it really should be. There's not like any other elements. They just drag it out for like 2 parts. And the problem is that the same sort of conflict happens with almost all the other ones. With Yuri and Sayori, Yuri eventually gets a little bit nervous around Sayori because she thinks that she doesn't like her stuff, and then conflict. Then they have to make up in part 2, and so on and so forth. The only one that actually felt like it was something different was Yuri and Natsuki, because there wasn't really a conflict there. They actually just grew closer to one another, which not only was that not predictable, but it actually was a better written story because it actually didn't feel super dragged out. It actually felt a little good. The Yuri and Natsuki one is the only side story I would say was actually pretty decent. But all the other ones, they feel way too predictable, and they just feel way too dragged out. They're not honestly that interesting when it comes down to it, which kind of sucks, but I don't know. So side stories overall are pretty weak, honestly, especially since the side stories don't do anything that mods couldn't do. Honestly, mods have been able to do much more than the side stories even offer. So it's like, just watch some mods online, which will tell even better stories. Like my own. Please watch them. But yeah, side story wise, it's pretty meh. And that's pretty much it when it comes down to the actual story stuff. I guess I could talk about the whole file folder and talk about how there's like some sort of secret project simulation thing, but I really don't care about it. The original DDLC already was so vague with everything it was saying anyways that I just don't care about the side story. But overall with the story, meh. I mean, don't mess with perfection, but at the same time, try to enhance it. I don't know, this game feels like they didn't even do much to enhance it. Like, it's more so an issue with the original DDLC. It just feels like the original DDLC wasn't changed at all, which is the biggest issue. It feels like they didn't really put any time into actually making it better. They just made it the same as it was before, which is fine, but for a game like this, I would kind of expect a little bit more to be put into it. Put some more spice to the menus or aesthetics or something like that. Make it a little bit more aesthetically presentable. It'd be nice, but no. But story-wise, it's okay. The original DLC still holds up pretty well, but most people are probably already spoiled by it, and the side stories are just so boring and dragged out. Now, gameplay-wise, there isn't really much to say gameplay-wise. It's basically just a visual novel. There's some things you can do with the poems. Side stories have literally no interaction with them, so you kind of just watch them. And that's pretty much that. You could set like wallpapers using the art pieces that you collect throughout the game, which I'll get to that later. But there's really not much to say about it. Gameplay-wise, there's not really much to say. It's a visual novel, it's fine. And control-wise, it's completely fine. Now, content. Now, this game is $15, and what you get is the original DLC, which would probably take you around maybe 4 hours, I would say, to get through an entire playthrough of that. And the side stories, each side story really isn't that long. In fact, I'd say one entire side story, including both parts, is more so around 25 minutes. So multiply that by 6, and you get 150 minutes. Hopefully. I don't remember math that well, but you take that hour and I guess a half, not really, maybe, into account, and you basically have a 5.5 hour game, basically. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what you get for $15. Now, there is some other stuff you can do. You can go for 100%, but I said you can go for 100%, but that doesn't mean that 100% is necessarily obtainable. You see, there's another thing that this game where you can actually go for 100% completion, since you can unlock various art pieces throughout the game as well as music. That's all good and dandy, but this game was not made with 100% in mind, because especially with the special poems that you receive, they're randomly chosen, and they're not chosen based on which ones you don't have. They're chosen just based off of complete randomness. So it might be impossible for you to actually get one of the special poems. You might be able to get all 9 of them, but you won't be able to get the last one. Also, there's actually a black and white menu, which if you remember from the original game, it would be a secret Easter egg that would unlock in Act 2 when you just randomly went on the main menu screen, and then it would have the black and white menu with the Dokis with blotted eyes and no actual buttons on there. Yeah, this still, supposedly, according to many people, is still only a 1% chance of ever happening. So, it basically means you have to keep reopening and closing and reopening DDLC over and over in Act 2 just to do it. It's just so annoying. 100% completion in this game is terrible. Do not go for it, because it's not even hard. It's just annoying and unfair. It is not well designed. And I actually did ask Dan Salvato about this personally on Twitter, whether or not this was actually going to get fixed, but I still haven't gotten any response. So, yeah, 100% completion is basically impossible unless you're stupid lucky. I know it's not the biggest issue, but seriously, couldn't they have, if they're going to add 100% completion, actually do it right? But, I don't know. But content-wise, the game really doesn't have that much to offer, unfortunately. For $15, when you could play the original game for free, and the side stories, you could just watch them on YouTube, there's really not a lot to say. There's really no reason to buy this game. But there is still one more category to talk about, and that being the music. The music in this game is amazing. I love the music in this game. It uses the same music from the original game, but it adds a bunch of new music, and the new music is oh so good. Lavender Mist and Dusk especially. Those are some of the best songs ever. They're so good. And thankfully they actually were smart about using music and only use the new music in the side stories, which is very nice. But honestly, there isn't really a lot to say about it. I'd rather you just listen to the music for yourself. Do that. But also, music-wise, very, very solid. Very good. And heck, there's even a music player in the game, so there you go. But with that all being said, we finally get to the conclusion. Honestly, Doki Doki Literature Club Plus was a very underwhelming game. That's the best way I would describe it. Underwhelming. You know, for waiting 4 years for anything new from Team Salvato, and this was the best that they could do, it's just sad. Like, seriously, they couldn't even have put a little bit more effort into this. It feels like this game was made in very little time with not that much effort. Like, honestly, the only real effort that was put into it was the CGs and the music. That was the only real stuff that they did. as well as getting the game to run on Unity. Those were the only things they actually put effort into. Otherwise, the game really doesn't feel like there's a lot of love put into it because, well, yes, there is good music and all this other stuff. It doesn't really enhance anything at all. And yes, I understand, don't mess with perfection, but it's like, do things that would actually be better, like just be more aesthetically pleasing, and also make the side stories actually interesting, instead of just kind of predictable and kind of dragged out. Make them better. It just feels like this game was made in very little time just to get some quick money, which is something that I really don't like to say, given that this game has basically given me a career on YouTube, but I can't. This game really was underwhelming at the end of the day. Seriously. And this next complaint isn't necessarily about the game itself, but physical versions of the game do not ship until late summer. So this game released digitally on June 30th, but physical versions of the game, which let me say is called the Physical Premium Edition, does not ship until late summer. That is embarrassing as hell. How in the hell is it going to take that long? Did you not make them yet? What's the deal? I don't understand. I bought it thinking it was going to come on release day, only to find out that, nope, not coming on release day. Comes out like 2 months later, which is really, really nice. Great job. But anyways, with that all being said, on my scale of 0 to 10, I give Doki Doki Literature Club Plus a 7 out of 10. I was debating about whether or not I should give it a 6.5, but I'm going to keep it at a 7. However, depending on the day, depending on my mood, it could be a 6.5 if I was to be a bit more cynical. But where it is right now, I'm going to put it at a 7 out of 10. This game was very disappointing at the end of the day. It felt like this game really didn't do anything that mods couldn't do. It just, honestly, just feels kind of meh. Now the question remains, should you buy this game? Well, to play the game, no. There's nothing really here to play. But if you do want to support Team Salvato, then I would recommend getting this game. Because keep in mind, they did make the original DLC for free, and I don't think it's necessarily out of question for them to charge money. It's just that they could have done so much more. But if you do want to support them, I would recommend getting it. But if you want to actually play the game, I wouldn't. It's just not good enough. Just watch the side stories on YouTube or something like that. There's no interaction to them, and there's really not that much other gameplay stuff anyways. Oh yeah, also one final complaint. Why is there not an animated opening to the game? Like seriously, all games have them nowadays. Have an animated opening into the game. It wouldn't have been that difficult to do. 40 seconds isn't that difficult. Why is there not an animated opening to the game? Alright, I think I've complained long enough. Thank you guys for watching, and take care.